Sometimes we need to look backward in order to move forward. So this webinar really goes back to January of 2017. And just imagine a hotel in Santa Barbara, California. In November of the prior year, California voters restored bilingual education to our state's public schools with the passage of Proposition 58. After nearly 2 decades of English-only legislation, my fellow citizens finally saw the light and opened doors for the millions of multilingual learners in our state. A few months later, my Corwin colleagues and I had the opportunity to convene a group of extraordinary educators and authors who have dedicated their lives to serving our nation's multilingual learners. Santa Barbara is known for its mild Mediterranean climate, but the day we met was cold, dark, and stormy. The skies opened, the rain came down in torrents, the waves crashed, the mudslides arrived, and our cell phones periodically buzzed in unison with emergency alerts. I might also add that as we met, a newly elected Donald Trump delivered his inauguration speech in which he promised to, quote, bring back our borders, end quote. And in truth, we were far too engaged in conversation to pay much attention to the inauguration. We were too busy envisioning a future in which the assets of our multilingual learners were affirmed and celebrated. But first, some walls had to come tumbling down. I remember that day, the moment that day, in which my author and friend, Andrea Honigsfeld, surfaced the metaphor of breaking down the wall. We understood that in order to realize our vision of equitable outcomes for multilingual learners, we had to first take a step back and critically examine the institutions, policies, and practices that stood in our way. Out of this discussion, we outlined a series of essential shifts in support of multilingual learners. And out of these shifts came a book entitled Breaking Down the Wall, a book that I'm immensely proud to have been part of. And one of these shifts, from monolingualism to multilingualism, became the basis for a new book and the subject of today's webinar, Breaking Down the Monolingual. I wish I had sufficient time to tout the accomplishments of each of today's panelists, but I'd much prefer that they hold the space to share their collective vision of a society in which multilingualism is the norm rather than the exception. However, before going any deeper, I need to honor my author, colleague, and friend, Ivannia Soto, a passionate champion of multilingualism who had the vision and foresight and courage to propose this new book. In this case, it was Ivannia who did the convening and assembled this team of brilliant chapter contributors. Ivannia, thank you for the gift that you are, and I'm turning the baton over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your kind words and for leading us through. If we hadn't had you with breaking down the breaking down the wall, the first book, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish and complete this book. So thank you, and thank you for what you've done in each of our lives. This is his last 3 days. I hope he doesn't mind that I'm saying this, but his last 3 days in this position. But what I have been saying is he's now going to be able to do what he wants to do instead of what he has to do. And some of what he has to do, he'll continue to do, but those things that he loves, he will, I know that he'll continue to make a difference in society. So thank you. Thank you for your guidance throughout the last 10 years. Okay, and with that, now I'm going to get, sobby here, but with that, we'll continue with this book. So breaking down the monolingual wall. And as we break down the monolingual wall, we first have to take a look at breaking down the linguistic wall. and the key terms and definitions that we use in this book. In the chat box, you'll see a question here on the slide, and you might want to respond in the chat box, choosing a term, telling us what it means to you. You'll notice that we use the term multilingual learner, right? Breaking down the monolingual wall. And you'll see that we use multilingual learner as well as emergent bilingual in this book and throughout this book. And we are purposely using that language because we want to make sure that we are using asset-based labels for the students that we serve. Unfortunately, and we still see some of these terms: limited English proficient, English as a second language learner, English language learner being used, right, even at the policy level. But in this book, we selected emergent bilingual, right, a term used to replace English learner, English language learner, and because it is a much more asset-based term. Emergent bilingual students are students who are continuing to develop their home language, right, their primary language, and we want that to happen, right, while also learning English. And you'll notice that some of these other terms are more English-based, right? English is the goal. But for us, with this book, emergent bilingual and multilingual learner, this larger, broader group, right, of students who are receiving services. So those may be our emergent bilingual students or our English learner students. They may be students who have exited out of this program or their language program, so they might have reclassified out of those programs. Never ELs, so students who were initially fluent in English, but still come from linguistically and culturally diverse backgrounds. And then our heritage language learners. So a person or a student who has proficiency in and cultural connection to the language of their home. And so please keep in mind that we are purposely, right, breaking down that linguistic wall by using these terms: emergent bilingual, multilingual learner. If you can, next slide, please, Melissa. Thank you. We also want to make sure that we highlight the type of program for our multilingual learners or our emergent bilingual learners. We are, throughout this book, taking a look at dual language education, and we wanted to define that as well up front. And what we mean by dual language education is that it's a form of bilingual education in which students are being taught, right, literacy and content in two languages. And we have an additive goal, right? It's one of the only programs with this additive goal of bilingualism and biliteracy. Sustained instruction in the partner language, the language other than English, for at least 6 years, right, in K through 5. And that's how we're getting to that sustained time, is how we're getting to biliteracy and not just bilingualism. At least 50% of instruction during the day would be in the partner language. We're already competing in society with English, so we want to make sure that there is depth of knowledge around that partner language, and then that it be rigorous language arts and rigorous literacy instruction in both of those program languages. That's what's going to get us the kinds of results, right, that we want to see with dual language. And the next slide. Thank you. The 4 pillars of dual language education, we made sure, notice we are highlighting 4 pillars, and historically there have been 3 pillars. We define this in chapter 1 using both Claribel Gonzalez's beautiful kind of visual here that she created. And we know that with 4 pillars, right, we need those 4 pillars to be strengthened in order that a dual language program really provides the kinds of results that we want in terms of biliteracy and bilingualism. And again, bilingualism, biliteracy, the equal status of two languages, and high levels of literacy in listening, speaking, reading, and writing, high academic achievement. So we oftentimes see students in dual language programs outperforming their native English counterparts, right? One of the benefits of this. And that is when we are using those high quality, grade level, and rigorous curriculum in the two languages, having and holding, right, those high expectations for our students. And then notice that two of the pillars are about culture. So two of the pillars are about language, two about culture. So we have sociocultural competence, which we have historically had with our three pillars, valuing cultures, languages, and diversity. But what we have been influenced, who we have been influenced by, is the work of Deb Palmer with critical consciousness. And take a look at how this takes us beyond just sociocultural competence. With critical consciousness, we want our students to be aware of structural and systemic oppression, and then be willing to take action, right? So via social and global change. So developing those counter narratives and then leading them into youth activism. So in this book, you'll see us, especially in chapter 1, unpack, chapter 1 and chapter 2, unpack the two cultural pillars. And just remember that metaphor of the 4 pillars. They need to be equally strengthened. The next slide. An overview of the book. Chapter 1 is an overview of actually all of the other chapters that come after it. Chapter 2 in a bit was written by Sydney Snyder, and it's all about culture. So that 4th pillar, the 3rd and 4th pillar, sociocultural competence and critical consciousness. Chapter 3, moving us into biliteracy and content and 2 languages by Margarita Calderon. Chapter 4, all about assessing in multiple languages by Margot Gottlieb. Chapter 5, moving us into collaboration. How do we implement collaboration within dual language settings by Joan LaChance and Andrea Hongesfeld. Chapter 6, from leading in monolingual programs to a dual language program. So how administrators, what do administrators need to know? Let us know if you're an administrator in the chat box. Marga Marshall and David Nungare. And then chapter 7 is about professional learning and what do dual language programs, what do dual language teachers need specifically in terms of professional learning. And then last but not least, policies, dual language policies that will strengthen dual language programs across a state by Lynn Scott. And then we're going to move into chapter 2. One of the features of the book is that at the end of the book, we have questions that you can lead your, facilitate and lead your groups through. So for chapter 2, this is, again, Sydney Snyder. What is one step that teachers can take to support their schools in strengthening their commitment to culturally and linguistically sustaining practices for multilingual learners? Sydney, what do you recommend?
Great, thank you. Well, thank you. I just want to say good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's really a pleasure to be here talking about this issue. So one of the primary goals of this chapter, from culturally and linguistically subtractive to culturally and linguistically sustaining pedagogy, is to really think about actionable steps that schools and educators can take to really support culturally responsive, culturally sustaining pedagogy. And this chapter is framed around 5 guiding principles. These are based on a book that I co-authored with Diane Stair-Fenner, but they're really grounded in the work of scholars such as Gloria Ladson-Billings, Geneva Gay, Zaretta Hammond, Django Paris, and Sammy Aline, just to name some of those that really provided the foundation for this chapter. And so the first guiding principle is that culturally responsive teaching is assets-based and grounded in a framework of cultural and linguistic equity. And this is really at the heart and the foundation, I think, of all that we do, right? We need to start with the assets. And what it can look like is a school-based mission that espouses an assets-based perspective, where all a commitment to all learners' voices being heard, and all stakeholders understanding this mission. It also is important, as Ivannia mentioned, this idea that students learn about and discuss the value of being multilingual, multicultural, because we want them to know, we talk about how being multilingual is a superpower, right? So we want them to really know and be able to articulate why it's so great that they are multilingual, that they are multicultural. Guiding principle 2 is that culturally responsive teaching simultaneously supports and challenges students. So this is really about that scaffolded instruction that we provide students so that they can access content, but it's also about how we hold high standards for students and really push them to think critically about issues, to look at topics from diverse perspectives, and really have that social justice lens that's so important. Guiding principle 3 is that culturally responsive teaching puts students at the center of the learning. And this is really a couple of things. This is how we have peer interactions that really make sure that our emergent bilinguals, our multilingual learners are included, that their voices are being heard. So thinking about how are you structuring those peer learning activities so that all students' voices are heard? What do those conversations look like in dual language programs? Are they happening equally in English and the partner language? We want to make sure, again, that students have an opportunity to draw on their full linguistic repertoire, and they're able to really make sure their voices are being heard. Putting students at the center of learning is also about engaging students in self-reflection and goal setting. So thinking about whether we're having student-led conferencing, or we're having portfolios where students reflect on their learning. These are all parts of putting students at the center of the learning. Fourth is leveraging and sustaining students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds and fostering that sociocultural competence. So understanding that there are various cultures and that no one culture is better than the other, right? And this really builds on that first guiding principle, that assets-based instruction. So this means, how do we provide opportunities to really build on their language backgrounds? What are the types of resources that are being included? Are they representative of students' home cultures? Are the authors coming from students' backgrounds and home cultures? Are we engaging with students' communities as a real way to build on what they already are bringing to the classroom, right? Always starting with where they are as a basis. And then finally, the last guiding principle is uniting student schools, families, and communities. And this is looking for ways that we begin to build relationships with students' families, that we look for barriers that might be preventing families from engaging in schools, whether it be not having interpreters, or whether there's issues of timing, whether there is families not feeling welcome. So those are all really critical ideas. And we also want to make sure that we're providing a way for families to be communicating their needs with us, right? So sometimes we see that the communication is very one way, coming from the school to families, but we want to make sure that families have a way to voice their concerns if they have them, that they have a way to ask questions. So these are really the 5 guiding principles. As you look at them and think about them, which one stands out to you as an area of need in your in your context? If you could just take a minute and share in the chat, which one of these really stands out to you? You could put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can share just something that you're thinking, a step that you might want to take. And as you're adding your comments, I'm going to pass it back to Ivannia for chapter 3. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'm seeing 2 and 3. Oh, lots of 5s in the chat here. Okay, we're going to move on to chapter 3, from one language to biliteracy and content in 2 languages. And as you listen to Margarita Calderon, think about how can discourse and vocabulary instruction be integrated into all subjects and both languages? Margarita.
Well, that's easy by giving students more opportunities to interact. As my colleagues already mentioned, vocabulary is critically important. Talk is literacy. First of all, we need to think that talk is literacy, and talk stems from vocabulary, and vocabulary builds discourse. We know that nationally, the average student learns approximately 3,000 to 5,000 words per year. But we need to make sure that they're learning these in 2 languages. And in order to be bilingual, biliterate, students need to master at least 50,000 words by the end of high school. And this is how they attain the seal of biliteracy. And we know from research that vocabulary in any language is a significant predictor of reading comprehension or reading difficulties. Next slide. Thank you. So how do we integrate discourse and vocabulary into all subject areas, all lessons, and for all teachers in every single school? Well, they need to be prepared and develop a mindset of teaching vocabulary and integrating it into reading and writing, and also into social emotional learning. Because as you see those little drops, those gotitas of SEL competencies, this is what's going to propel students to want to learn more in 2 languages, to be proud of their primary language, and to develop self-efficacy as they begin to develop interaction skills. Teachers love to teach Tier 3 words, especially in secondary schools. These are subject-specific words that relate to their content. But we need to keep in mind that there will be a lot of newcomers, and they need also the Tier 1 basic words. But everyone will need more Tier 2 type words. These are information processing words that nest those Tier 3 concepts in these long sentences. And if students don't know the words at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of the sentence, there's no way that they're going to comprehend that Tier 3 word, that concept that is so important. And so it behooves everyone in the school to look at their text and pull out those Tier 2 words whenever possible. And in order to develop discourse, the students need a lot of connectors, a lot of tools, such as the ones that you see. And yes, they can start with the easy words like the green ones with because and those, but they need to move quickly to more sophisticated words. We rarely let them see their learning progression and how far they can go on a weekly basis. And of course, the same thing, la même chose, igualmente, in whatever other language that students are studying. If we're thinking about dual language programs, then the quality of the vocabulary, of the discourse opportunities needs to be there in order for them to become truly bilingual and biliterate and bicultural.
Thank you, Margarita. Okay, we're going to move into Assessment in multiple languages with Margot Gottlieb. Our question is, how can assessment be extended in multiple languages to all teachers working with multilingual learners? For example, through the joint planning meetings or communities of practice, so that it becomes part of the school culture.
And the easy answer to this is that we have to become a force. All of us who promote, advocate, have as their mission to become to make sure that classroom assessment is part of and integrated into instruction. That's the easy answer. And then as we become a community of learners, we need to join forces, come together to create a language and assessment policy, starting in our classrooms, for our schools, for our school districts, that really incorporate these premises and principles. So let's make a pact and look at these 4 of many principles that we can use in assessing multilingual learners. And first of all, everyone in the school must accept multilingualism and multiculturalism as the norm. It reflects our global society. It looks at our individual communities. We have to draw from where our students live and accentuate all their multilingual and multicultural strengths. And we can't do that unless we have this underlying principle. The second one is that we want to honor and promote multiple languages, foster the students' movement within and across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Said another way is that we want to make sure that translanguaging is part of instruction and it carries over onto assessment. We want to ensure that our multilingual learners' language use is promoted, is honored, and is accepted as part of their full linguistic repertoire. The third principle is that we must respect and encourage multiple perspective taking within instruction, and again, carry that over into classroom assessment. We need, as an educational community, all of us need to grow transculturalism along with multilingual awareness, multicultural awareness, and metacognitive awareness. And all this contributes to students' evidence for learning. And last of the ones presented here, just as Sydney said, we must center multilingual learners, not scores, not percentages, not levels of language proficiency, but what our multilingual learners can do. In doing so, we're going to build our relationships between students and teachers, and between our colleagues. So the next slide, how do we even start? By giving our students multiple opportunities to use their multiple languages, both for instruction and classroom assessment. Well, here are 5 nifty ideas. One is to confirm their understandings, not only of content, but of language, to clarify any misunderstandings they might have by having students have opportunities to interact with each other in their partner languages as well as English. It gives them opportunities to dive deeper into concepts and language by giving them additional resources, being able to advantage technology, for example. That's number 1 on many of our minds today. Part of building relationships is integral to assessment, because assessment isn't a one-way street. Assessment between and among students really will help them build projects, products, performances to show what they do know and give multimodal evidence for their learning. And then lastly, we've got to make sure to that assessment as well as instruction is helping to build, shape, validate, and form the students' identities in multiple languages and multiple cultures, including their social and emotional development. So in essence, what we want to happen is that our multilingual learners can accrue and share their evidence for learning based on mutually agreed upon criteria that goes back to a language and assessment policy. We want to make sure that it is negotiated and that our multilingual learners play a central role in their own assessment.
Okay, real quickly before you go away, Margot, a question in the chat.
Oh.
How can I do that when I only speak English and my own language, and I do not speak Spanish and other languages that my students speak?
But if there's more than one Spanish speaker in your classroom, you're all set. They have a partner, they have a pair. And guess what? I bet you their families speak Spanish as well. And if they speak Spanish, there's other people in the community. Use community resources, use technological resources. It's understandable. Some of you may be in classrooms with 5, 10 different languages, but give multilingual learners responsibility for their own learning, and they will rise to the occasion, and they'll build their own agency and confidence in doing so.
Love it. Thank you so much, Marco. Okay, so we're ready for chapter 5, from educator collaboration in a monolingual setting to collaboration in a dual language setting. And this will be Joan and Andrea. What recommendations would you offer other educators regarding effective collaborative ways to build equity within a DL program?
This is a great place to start talking more intensely about collaboration. We're going to piggyback on our and extend our esteemed colleagues and what they've already mentioned. Starting with Dan Alpert, he mentioned in the very beginning of the presentation that dual language education is growing at monumental paces all over the country, and so we also know that there's quite a bit of heavy lifting involved. Not just in creating a new program, but also growing and maintaining current programs that are out there. And so we want to emphasize the importance of bringing professionals together for shared leadership. This starts with multilingual learners having equal access to dual language education and high quality programs in and around the communities where they live. It's a little bit of a challenge in many cases for a few reasons. There are also, even though we've made strides, there are also some real challenges regarding the purpose of a dual language program in a specific community. And so we want to emphasize that multilingual learners, keeping our multilingual learners and our English learners in mind and serving the community where they live is of a critical nature. We also acknowledge and honor the fact that this is a complex and dare we say political situation. So now more than ever, we need to advocate with each other, just like what Margot was saying about policy and impact. We need to collaborate so that we are well positioning ourselves to advocate for these equal access moments so that all kids, we know that dual language education benefits all students, and all students need access to these programs. So Andrea, I'm going to let you take the next slide, my collaborator and friend.
Thank you so much for that introduction to the 4 recommendations that we're bringing to you. And we're going to look at these 4 recommendations through 2 lenses. First of all, in the chat box, we're going to invite you to give yourselves bragging rights. Which of these recommendations are you already living in your educational space? Which of these are already realities for you regarding dual language education? First one, let's work together with community stakeholders to ensure that the program serves the families and the students where it's located. Joan already mentioned this really important perspective on equitable program design. And if that's your case, just put number 1 in the chat box. Number 2, Let's ask the hard questions. Who benefits most from the program? How and why? Number 3, we're getting a little bit more technical here. Let's provide professional learning and ongoing professional learning, authentic professional learning for program teachers to learn about and enact critical consciousness. You remember that 4th pillar? Via the curricula, materials, multidimensional assessment practices, community advocacy, and many, many more. And last but not least, collaboration about collaboration. Let's prioritize collaborative routines within and across program grade levels. So let's see, Joan, what are you seeing? What numbers popped in for acknowledging successful practices already?
Lots of number 1, lots of number 3. Oh, I love this one. 1, 2, 3, and 4. There you go.
Love that.
Some coming in for 2, little by little. So this is awesome.
Now, some of you are already answering my second question, which is,
Right.
what needs more work? I think some of you just know us too well. You're anticipating what the second question was going to be. After acknowledging and starting out with your successes, with our celebrations of what works well already in your context, please take a look at these 4 recommendations and now add the number in the chat box that you would like to focus on, that you would like to do more of, that you would like to prioritize in your own context. By the way, there's no right or wrong answer, and that might be a number 5, number 6, number 7. So if there are other dimensions to your work that you need to prioritize to make this program model more equitable, more collaborative, please add that too. Joan, what are you seeing? You see, we're trying to collaborate about collaboration here. So go ahead, back to you.
3s and 4s are coming in with the need for more work, and we're really happy to hear that, because this opens up the spaces for in school, in program collaboration, whether it's with an ELD teacher, a special education teacher, a paraprofessional, teaching assistant. It's a community effort. The whole school needs to be involved.
And Dawn mentioned that even if you're not in a dual language context, some of these same recommendations, regardless of what kind of program models are available to your multilingual learners, the same recommendations are applicable. So thank you so much for recognizing that.
One last quick plug. We're
Yes.
really aiming to go K-12. Maybe even K-16 or K-20 with dual language education. So keep advocating for those collaborative relationships. That's what helps us extend.
Thank you. Back to you, Ivannia.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving into from leading in a monolingual program to leading in a dual language setting. So how can stakeholders use their voices as agents of change for their dual language program? And when can they have courageous conversations about inequities in your program? And so we're moving on to Marga and David.
Yes, thank you. I believe we asked this question before, but if you are a dual language program leader, administrator, on your way to being an administrator, put that in the chat box. We would love to see who is joining us today. But yeah, those were the questions that we posed at the end of our chapter, right? Because while leading dual language schools, David and I often asked ourselves what other resources were out there to continue improving our programs. And we did know that we were voices of change, and we kept fighting on what was needed to be done to ensure our programs were successful. But, this chapter was a great opportunity to share our work with other administrators of dual language programs and everything that it's been done in the book, right? Everything, the content, the assessments, the collaboration, everything. We wanted to look at that through the lens of the dual language administrators. So it was really, really an honor working, because both David, my other co-author, and I had similar experiences as administrators of dual language programs. But with the support we're getting from the states, the United States Secretary of Education in promoting bilingualism, multilingualism, the race we see on dual language programs, there is a need to serve our multilingual learners. We are promoting, right? And we really need to provide the best dual language programs for them. Implementation and alignment of dual language programs need to guide the work as we follow recommendation from our states, and the urgency of ensuring that more students have access to high quality and linguistically responsive education. I do see that we do have some principles, dual language principles here. It is amazing, and thank you for joining us. Our school and district leaders are really key for these programs, for dual language programs to be successful. We need to ensure that communications and systems are clearly understood and accessible to staff and all community members. In this chapter, we share how our work as administrators of dual language programs aligned to the guiding principles for dual language education, and how this handbook can be used as a resource for all practitioners, and how it gives us a common framework and language that can guide our dual language work and instruction. Superintendents, chief academic officers, assistant superintendents of school, content executive directors, instructional coaches, front office staff, right? Anyone who works in a dual language district or school should have the guiding principles for dual language education to guide their work, and to be rigorous and hold high expectations in the implementation of our students' bilingual programs. In this chapter, we share our consejitos, some little advice, and we give some tools, and we name conferences to attend. We point to what conversations we should be having with our staff during monthly meetings, partnerships to have to strengthen the program. So we really we really hope the chapter creates that collaboration and more collaboration with dual language leaders around schools and districts, and embraces the need to make a positive change in the future of our multilingual learners. So I'm going to give the floor to my co-author so he can continue talking in the next slide. Sí se puede.
Buenas tardes a todos. David Nungaray here. Really grateful to be here with such a powerhouse authors, and really grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with Marga. We really know that breaking down the monolingual wall is only going to happen if we have effective leadership at all levels, all the way from our Secretary of Education to the teachers in our classrooms, to the principals that are leading schools and the central offices that support them. So I really want to stamp that whoever you are, you showed up to this webinar and you're a leader, and we need your leadership to keep advancing this work and to really break down a monolingual wall. We also recognize that there are just persistent inequities that exist in our schooling systems, especially for our multilingual learners, and we're not going to move the needle forward if we don't reckon with America's legacy around forced assimilation practices, whether that's been through indigenous communities or through the laws and practices that have diminished their opportunities, such as Prop 227, which I was a student who went to schools in California during that time, and then was blessed to be a school leader of a dual language kindergarten through 8th grade school in Texas, and spent the last 13 years of my career in Texas, that now exceeds both in terms of student population and percentage, the number of multilingual learners, hence the need for urgent leadership. And we see that all across the board. The other thing that we talked about in our chapter was really thinking about bilingual talent issues. We need strong pipelines for teachers, strong pipelines for administrators, strong pipelines for central office leaders and superintendents that really understand our students, our communities, and can build effective programs and support them, and not back down when the going gets tough, because as one of our authors said earlier, this is political, and really thinking about the need for that effective leadership. The last thing that I'll say here simply is that we need alignment across the board, that people need to understand the vision for the experiences that they want their students to have. They want their educators. We talked quite a bit about professional learning, which I know is where we're headed shortly, and really think about the bridge that we need to build, bridges, not walls. So thank you all.
Thank you, David. Bridges, not walls. I'm putting that in the chat. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Okay, chapter 7. We're moving into from a one-size-fits-all workshops to job-embedded professional learning for dual language teachers. We know that there isn't enough, right? Dual language specific professional learning, and Ruby is going to help us unpack the question, how are DL teacher voice and choice included in the planning of professional learning and throughout districts? Take it away, Ruby.
Thank you, Ivannia. You know, this is a very important question to ask, and to ask administrators and also ask teachers and educators. How are their voices being included, and what systems do we have in place to ensure that we are taking into consideration the unique needs of our dual language educators? So I do want to ask the room if anybody would like to share in the chat, how is your voice being heard? And if you're an administrator, how do you ensure that you're including teacher voice and choice into your professional learning plan? You know, this is often a commonly missed step when educators or when districts plan professional learning. I think it's critical that we take into consideration that we are facing a teacher shortage, especially a dual language teacher shortage. And to be able to sustain our programs, we have to ensure that our teachers feel confident in their pedagogy, confident in their skills, especially because we have teachers from all spectrums of the linguistic and professional world, right? All of our teachers come with a very diverse and unique set of skills. A lot of us went to school in Mexico or in Latin America or in our home countries where we were prepared with pedagogy or with language, but a lot of us didn't, right? And so it's important to keep in mind that we, as much as we differentiate for our students, we're also differentiating professional learning for our teachers. You know, there is a definition about effective professional learning on the ESSA, but we also have to think about it through a multilingual lens. For dual language classrooms, for dual language teachers, that definition needs to be a lot more expanded, because we have to think about how we're preparing ourselves and our educators to provide support in 2 languages, to make sure that we're covering and addressing the 4 pillars of dual language education, making sure that we're creating opportunities for teachers to collaborate, to learn from each other, to visit each other's classrooms, and that we're also providing coaching, ongoing coaching and support. So this is, again, a very critical question, because this is what really sets the stage for effective professional learning for our dual language teachers. There are a lot of things that we have to ensure that we are keeping in mind whenever we're thinking about our teachers, because it's important that our teachers also feel and have opportunities to reflect on their own practice. Teacher voice is important. Teacher choice is critical, because we are very much aware of our own needs as dual language educators. But when we work in places where maybe the administrators may not be as aware of how a dual language classroom works, they may not be aware of those needs. So as leaders, we implore you to really think about how you are learning about the systems of support that teachers need, but how you're also tapping into your own staff to find out what they need, to find out what they would like to learn. We want teachers to have that ownership of learning, just like we do with our students. And for that, we need to ensure that our teachers' voices and their choices included in the differentiated professional learning plan. That should not be an add-on to what we do with our monolingual teachers, but should be priority for our dual language teachers. Their professional learning will look different from the professional learning our monolingual teachers get. And it is important and critical and crucial that we understand and that we have the courage to invest in the professional learning of our dual language educators. With all of that said, there are ways that we can ensure that our teachers have that voice and that choice. So the next slide, you will see a few recommendations on how to ensure that we are including this as part of our yearly plan, right? We have to remember that dual language instruction is core instruction for our students. So teachers need those supports, and those supports, that funding, that that investment into how we're preparing them needs to be part of our core plan that we have for our teachers. It's important that we engage our teachers in reflection cycles. Data, looking at student data is really important, because as educators, we want to make sure that our results are transparent for our families, right? We want to make sure that a strong program does have the reflection piece, right? Of looking at data and identifying our strengths, but also our areas of growth, to make sure that we are not creating gaps for our students, right? That we're addressing any gaps that may show up. We also recommend a recommendation is to also conduct a district-wide survey to gather teachers' professional learning interests and needs, right? Just like with our kids, if it's not relevant to me, it's not going to have the same impact as if it's something that I am interested in, right? Conducting school-wide professional learning assessment needs, right? Making sure that we are also gathering teachers' collective voices and making sure that we are addressing their collective needs, because that's what's going to make a program strong. When all the teachers feel competent, confident, and when they feel like they have the tools to provide support for their students. Making sure that we're including teacher representatives when we're developing our professional learning plan. Dual language teachers need to be part of creating those plans whenever we're looking at whole district systems, including making sure that we're including dual language topics presented in the language of instruction, because it's not the same thing to receive training in English and then have to translate everything to the other language, because not everything translates. Languages have different structures, and the professional learning will look different for dual language teachers. We also need to create opportunities for teachers to attend conferences, to connect, to collaborate, to be around mind-like colleagues, right, that are going to support their growth as well. And then we're also embedding and providing resources for vertical dual language planning. It's very critical that kinder is talking to first grade and second grade and third grade, fourth grade and fifth grade. It's not a one teacher's job, is a collective effort. And finally, providing opportunities for teachers to engage in coaching cycles with expert coaches. So we do need to train our coaches as well. Our coaches need to be and feel very confident in providing professional learning in dual language settings. And I know there's a lot more that we can talk about, right? But you'll find a lot more information and hopefully very useful tools in chapter 7. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to you, Ivannia.
Thank you, Ruby. Okay, we're moving along to chapter 8, from monolingual policies to dual language policies. And this is our final chapter with Lynn. And our question is, how can your school and community reduce the DL teacher shortage with improved working conditions, financial incentives, and professional opportunities?
Thank you, Ivannia. And someone will have to turn my video on.
Oh.
Okay. Now it says the host has stopped my video, but that's all right. So the language, oh, okay, great, thank you. Great, thank you. This has been excellent today. It really has given us a sense of how these chapters work together and how you can start at any point that you want to enter into this discussion with your colleagues. When we think about the language policy, I wanted to frame this a little bit by Bernard Spolsky's work, some of the theoretical understandings. And Spolsky says that language policy has 3 different components. It has the language practices, And then it has your beliefs about language or your ideology. And then finally, there's the planning about how you use language. And Spolsky even says, if you don't have a plan for how you're using language, your de facto language policy might be a mixture of what your practices are. So just as we heard Ruby mention in the prior chapter, thinking about professional learning, you really need to think through what the language practices are going to be for your teachers in their professional learning. You can go on to the next slide. So when we're thinking about how do we recruit and then retain teachers and encourage some of our colleagues who may be bilingual to improve their biliteracy skills or their bilingual skills and add a bilingual authorization or become a bilingual teacher, we really need to think of the obstacles that we're seeing. And in this chapter, I look at 5 different states and how they are taking a look at this. Yes, financial incentives are important, but once we have teachers, we need to think of the working environment. So is there a financial incentive added to bilingual teachers, to dual language teachers who are asked to do additional duties at parent conferences, asked to do additional duties at school-wide assemblies, do translations, determine curriculum that goes beyond what their monolingual colleagues are asked to do? That's where we have to really examine what the school site is providing and asking of bilingual teachers. So definitely we need to strengthen the teacher pipeline and really identifying teacher candidates and helping them with their training. We need to look at the working conditions where dual language teachers may be asked to take on more than their colleagues. And let's look at the next slide, just to kind of wrap this session and this chapter up, is looking at how different aspects of dual language policies in these states have impacted the retention of teachers. Massachusetts, which had a very English-only policy, now through the look at, the State Department of Education looks at the positive aspects of dual language education and how school districts can have and develop dual language schools and programs within the state. Of course, in California, we had the 2 decades of English only that was reversed by Prop 58, which looks at a monolingual or a multilingual California. But beyond that, California now has a policy initiative that is discussed in various parts of this book called the Global 2030 Initiative. Florida is an interesting case where through consent decrees, local advocacy organizations went to court through community activism to force the state of California to open its schools and its local districts to allow dual language programs to develop. And then, as we know from the Lao remedies, in Texas, we saw how the Castaneda decision, the Castaneda family were advocates who went to court and advanced dual language policy. Finally, in a state like Colorado that has a new act called the READ Act that is from the early grades to grade 3, even at the state level, at their Department of Education in Colorado, they put out a memo that really accentuates the needs for us to use asset-based terminology. So all of these different state and state policies, legislation, voter referendum, and even at the state level within departments of education. When you see that happening, that's where local school districts can capitalize on those changes within your state to advocate for dual language education and to really improve the working conditions and the validations of dual language teachers. I think I'll stop there because I think we're getting close to time, but I really want to impress upon you that an examination of dual language practices is something that you should do at your school level. What are really your practices that are happening? What's the belief behind those? And what's our plan for language?
Thank you, Lynn. And just a takeaway from what Lynn said at the beginning, that you can enter into this book at any chapter. You can have, there are those reflective questions that help with a book study. I'll turn it back over. Thank you all to all of our authors, and I'll turn it back over to Melissa.
Yes, thank you all so much.